I used to tell myself that I'd seen it all. After more than 2 decades on the force, I figured there wasn't much left in the world that could surprise me. But lately, I've been having doubts about that. Doubts that follow me, like shadows I can't shake, no matter how far I drive. The problem with shadows is they grow longer at night, and some nights, no matter how fast you try to outrun them, they catch up to you. I'm not one to dwell on the past. Never have been. But what happened on that stretch of road a few weeks back, it's been sitting in the back of my mind, refusing to let go. I keep trying to tell myself it was nothing, just my head playing tricks on me. But the more I think about it, the more I realize it wasn't just a trick. There was something out there, something real. It was 1997, and after retiring early from the police force due to being shot in my left thigh, I found myself taking on a second career. I didn't quit because I wanted to. I had a lot of life left in me, and quite frankly, I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just because some punk got lucky with his aim. But the higher-ups, they decided otherwise. That's how I ended up working as a private investigator. And yeah, sure, it's a bit of a cliché, an old cop turns PI. But that's where life led me, and I had no complaints. Well, maybe a few, but not about the job itself. Most days, I don't take too many cases. To be honest, not many of them catch my interest. After years in law enforcement, there's not much that excites me anymore, and I've grown weary of the same old song and dance. But every now and then, something crosses my desk that piques my curiosity. When that happens, I still get the urge to dust off my old Buick and hit the road. It helps that I hate flying. Planes just aren't for me. I've got a fear of them, one I've never been able to shake. The idea of being trapped in a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air? No, thank you. Trains and buses? Forget it. It's not just the cramped spaces, but the people. Too many damn people, talking, coughing, making noise, getting in your space. I've never been one for crowds, and I sure as hell don't need to sit next to some stranger for hours on end. I prefer the road, just me and the hum of my old Buick. At least then, I'm in control, and I don't have to deal with anybody I don't want to. Sure, driving long distances can be tiring, but it beats being crammed in with a bunch of folks I'd rather avoid. I guess it's ironic that I hate people, given the career I chose. So, a buddy of mine called one day, asking if I'd take a case as a favor. A simple case, really. Just some guy suspected of cheating on his wife. Nothing new, nothing I hadn't seen 100 times before. Back in my younger days, I used to hate these kinds of cases. I always felt like they destroyed families, tore kids apart, and left a trail of heartache behind them. But this one was different. No kids involved, just a rich couple who'd clearly fallen out of love. The wife wanted to know what her husband was up to. I figured, why not? The husband was supposedly in Ohio on a business trip, meeting with a client. Me? I was all the way down in Louisiana. That meant about 900 miles of driving, give or take. Normally, I wouldn't mind a drive like that. I enjoy the open road, the way it clears my head and lets me think. But these old bones aren't what they used to be. I knew I'd have to make at least one stop along the way, maybe more. Still, I packed up my kit, my trusty Canon camera, a couple of packs of Reds, and of course my old Sipper. Can't leave home without it. It was 4 p.m. I tanked up my Buick, then I started heading out that same afternoon after I met with the client. I was making good time. I looked at my watch. It was midnight right on the dot, and I was somewhere in Kentucky. The roads were empty, and I was starting to feel the fatigue setting in. It seemed like a good time to start looking for a motel. The thought of sleeping in the car wasn't all that appealing anymore. As I drove down a long, barren stretch of road, I decided to turn on the radio. Maybe some jazz would help me relax, take the edge off the late-night drive. I switched to FM and started fiddling with the dial. Nothing but static at first, which didn't surprise me. I figured I was too far from any stations. Still, I kept turning the dial, hoping to catch something. Eventually, I hit on a weak signal, around 87.7 or 87.9. There was talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was garbled, almost robotic, but not quite. I couldn't explain it, which is unusual for me. Normally, I'm pretty good at describing things. You see, I have this thing about numbers. Always had, probably always will. It's a bit of OCD, I guess, but I can't stand uneven numbers. If I can help it, I'll always stop at an even one. So I kept turning the dial, trying to find the sweet spot, and I settled on somewhere between 87.7 and 87.9. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could do. The voices were still faint, still garbled, but at least they were there. I stayed on that signal since I didn't really have any other options, hoping it would clear up as I drove to find a motel. The strange thing was, as I kept driving, the clock on my dashboard still read midnight. Now, I'd been on that road for what felt like hours, so how could it still be midnight? I started getting that uneasy feeling, the kind that lingers in the back of your mind. There were no cars, no lights, no signs, no nothing. Just me, the Buick, and the darkness. I pulled over to the side of the road and checked my watch. It was one of those old mechanical ones. No batteries, just the steady tick of gears. I held it to my ear and listened. I could hear the clicking, but the second hand wasn't moving. Great, I muttered. Just what I need. My watch had stopped, and the road was as empty as ever. I didn't carry a cell phone back then, never trusted the things. Besides, the technology was still in its infancy. I wasn't interested in keeping up with it. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, stepped out of the car. I figured my legs could use some stretch. I turned the engine off but left the keys in the ignition with the headlights on, because there were no lights around the area. I took a look around. There was nothing. Just an endless expanse of grass on either side of the road, disappearing into the night. I didn't wander far from the car. Instead, I leaned against the Buick, reached for the lighter inside my chest pocket to light me one. As I flicked the lighter, in that brief spark, I saw something. A face of some sort, right in front of mine, close enough that I could feel its breath, or something. I jumped back, dropping the cigarette onto the ground. My heart was racing. I'm not easily spooked, but that got to me. I looked around, but there was nothing there. No sign of anyone or anything. Just me, alone in the dark. Tired, I told myself. You're just tired. I reached for the old sipper and took a swig, letting the warmth settle in my chest. It helped a little. I decided to get back in the car and keep driving. There was no point in standing around, spooking myself over nothing. When I got back in the Buick, the radio was still on. The same garbled voices, the same weak static. I didn't bother turning it off. Figured it might keep me awake at least. I turned the engine back on and got back on the road. As I drove, though, I couldn't help but notice something odd. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing pairs of glowing yellow eyes just beyond the reach of my headlights. They were in the trees, in the grass, watching me as I passed by. Too many to be animals, but I told myself that's what they were. Had to be. The night was quiet. Too damn quiet. Even with the radio on low, the static seemed louder than usual. The road stretched on, with no end in sight. With my window down, and I decided to light me another one, hoping it would calm my nerves. I flicked the lighter, and finally, after a few tries, I got it lit. I took a long drag and relaxed, or at least I tried to. I leaned my head back a little, just above the headrest. Then I saw it. Something was standing in the middle of the road right in front of me. I wasn't going fast enough to swerve, but I managed to stop the car just in time. There, standing in my headlights, was the tallest, strangest creature I'd ever seen. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its skin was gray, almost translucent, and its eyes, those damn eyes, were the same glowing yellow I'd seen in the trees. It was hideous, and its face was the worst part. At first, there was no mouth. But then, slowly, its body began to split open, starting from its chest down to its lower stomach, revealing a gaping black void that looked like its mouth. Even with my headlights shining right on it, inside it was pure darkness. Slowly, I felt emptiness, sadness. Then, a rush of emotions all at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring into that impossibly black void, so dark it felt like it could swallow the world, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like I was stuck there for an eternity. Then suddenly I felt something inside my thigh. Felt like an ant bite, but much worse, then turned into a sharp pain. The cigarette fell onto my lap, burning a hole through my cheap dress pants, the same ones my ex-wife gave me. The pain snapped me out of whatever trance I was in, and I slammed the car into gear. The tires screeched as I sped away from that thing, my hands still trembling as I held tight on the steering wheel. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen a lot of ugly faces. Hell, my ex-wife was damn ugly. But that thing trumped her by a mile. I'd been driving for what felt like at least an hour, maybe more. The damn motel should be closer by now. Rest stop, gas station, diner, anything, I muttered to myself, gripping the wheel tighter. Where the hell am I? What's happening? Is this a dream? I glanced out the window. I still don't hear a damn thing. Not an owl, not even a cricket. The hum of the engine and the low crackle of static from the radio, the only sounds accompanying me through the pitch-black night. The glowing eyes that had been watching from the shadows earlier seemed to have disappeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something was following me. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tight, and every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I half expected to see something looming in the darkness behind me. But the road stayed empty. The night stayed still. I took a swig from the old sipper, the burn of the liquor doing little to calm my nerves. My mind kept replaying the image of that creature, its towering height, the way its chest and stomach split open, turning into a mouth like something straight out of a nightmare. That thing wasn't from this world. My gut told me to keep driving, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind warned me that maybe it didn't matter how far I went. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. As I rounded a bend in the road, something caught my eye. A faint glow ahead, like headlights, flickering in and out of the mist. I squinted, leaning forward over the steering wheel. Was it another car? No, too small. It looked more like a figure, standing in the middle of the road again. I slowed the Buick to a crawl, my heart hammering in my chest. Not again, I muttered under my breath. I kept my foot poised above the brake, ready to slam it if I needed to. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just any figure. It was the creature. The same gray, lanky form, with those massive yellow eyes glowing in the night. But this time, it was closer. much closer. Its eyes locked onto mine through the windshield, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't look away. Those eyes held me there, pinned me in place like I was some kind of prey. My foot, hovering above the brake, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My instincts screamed at me to floor it, to ram the damn thing if I had to. But my body refused to cooperate. I was stuck, frozen in place like the first time, staring into that bottomless void of a mouth. Then, in a single horrifying movement, it stepped forward. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. One long, bony leg sliding toward me, then the other. I could see every detail now. The rough, cracked skin stretched tight over its body, the way its joints seemed too large for its limbs. And then, the mouth. That awful, gaping hole, splitting open again from its chest down to its grotesque belly. Only this time, something shifted inside the darkness. It wasn't empty anymore. I felt my pulse quicken, panic clawing at the edges of my mind. The creature took another step. I could hear a faint clicking sound, almost like the ticking of a clock, but it wasn't coming from the car or the radio. It was coming from the creature. It was getting closer. I summoned every ounce of willpower I could muster, struggling to break free from the trance-like hold it had on me. Finally, with a gasp, I snapped out of it, like surfacing from deep, suffocating water. My foot slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as the Buick shot forward. I wasn't waiting around this time. If that thing wanted me, it was going to have to work for it. The headlights hit the creature full on, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching, as I barreled toward it. And then, just as I thought I'd hit it, it vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, like it had been swallowed up by the darkness itself. The road ahead was clear, but I wasn't stupid enough to believe I'd lost it. My mind raced as I tore down the road, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't know what the hell that thing was, or how it could disappear like that, but I had a feeling I hadn't seen the last of it. The static on the radio suddenly spiked, louder than before. Those strange, garbled voices crackled through the speakers, and I could have sworn I heard my own name in the mix. What the hell? I reached over to turn the volume down, but the knob wouldn't budge. It was like the damn thing was stuck. The voices grew louder, faster, almost frantic now, and I felt a sudden chill in the air, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. I checked the rearview mirror again, my heart hammering in my throat, and then, in the blink of an eye, it was back, looming in the shadows, as if it had never left. "Give me a damn break," I hollered, my voice cracking through the suffocating silence, as if demanding the universe itself cut me some slack. The creature was standing in the middle of the road behind me, only now it was moving. Fast. Much faster than before. It wasn't walking anymore. It was running, those long, spindly legs covering ground quicker than anything that size should have been able to. Its eyes glowed brighter like two headlights bearing down on me. I floored it, the engine roaring as I pushed the Buick as hard as it could go. The road blurred by, but I couldn't outrun it. It was gaining on me, inch by inch, and no matter how fast I went, it was always there, right behind me. Closer, closer. I was desperate. My mind raced with options, but there weren't many. The road was straight, no turns, no exits. Just me, the Buick, and this thing chasing me down like a predator that had finally caught the scent of its prey. Then, just when I thought it would catch me, it did something that chilled me to my core. It leaped. In one smooth motion, the creature sprang into the air, disappearing from my view. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirrors, but there was nothing. No sign of it. My foot was still pressed to the floor, the speedometer needle trembling near its limit, but the road ahead was clear. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. My heart was racing, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for it to appear again, waiting for those eyes, waiting for the mouth. Suddenly, there was a thud, a loud, bone-rattling thud on the roof of the Buick. I swerved, trying to keep control as the car fishtailed for a moment. I looked up, half expecting to see its face pressed against the windshield, but all I saw was darkness. The thudding continued, heavy, rhythmic, like something was crawling across the roof. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. I could feel it. And then, it hit the window. Its hand, if you could even call it that, slammed against the driver's side window, fingers long and clawed, gripping the frame. I could see it now, just outside, clinging to the side of the car. The skin on its hand was gray and leathery, with deep cracks that oozed some kind of black ichor. The claws scraped against the glass, leaving long, jagged lines. I swerved again, trying to shake it off, but it held tight. I could hear its body scraping against the side of the car as it tried to pull itself closer. The thudding on the roof grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was crawling toward the front, toward the windshield. I floored it again, the engine screaming, but it didn't matter. This thing wasn't letting go. I swerved one last time, the Buick careening dangerously close to the ditch on the side of the road. The creature's grip loosened, just for a second, but that was all I needed. With a final jolt, it was thrown from the side of the car, tumbling into the darkness behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew it wasn't gone for good, but I had bought myself enough time. I shouldn't have left my gun, I growled, frustration boiling over. Hell, I could really use it right now. I glanced around, my eyes darting between the shadows. The adrenaline still surged through me, my nerves frayed from the creature and everything else that had just happened. Of all the damn promises to make, why did I listen to her? I muttered, cursing under my breath. My ex-wife, of all people. She makes me promise to leave the gun behind, and like a fool, I do it. Why? I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel tighter in frustration. Why the hell did I think that was a good idea? I remembered the last fight we had, her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, that look on her face. "You're done carrying that thing around everywhere, right?" she'd said. "No more. Promise me." And like an idiot, I had promised. Why? Maybe it was to stop her nagging, or maybe it was just to avoid another argument. But whatever the reason, it was haunting me now. "Should have known better," I muttered. "Always said I'd never let anyone talk me out of carrying it. And now here I am, driving endlessly on this empty road with whatever the hell that was out there." The regret weighed heavy in my chest. Damn it, I should have known better. The hours of driving had stretched into what felt like days, though the clock still claimed it was midnight. That clock. It hadn't moved an inch since the moment I started down that long, empty stretch of road. My brain was fuzzy, replaying the bizarre events of the night. The garbled voices on the radio, the creature that had appeared not once, but twice, and the sensation that something was out there, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. As the miles wore on, a creeping realization began to form. It wasn't just the creature or the empty road. Something was off, something bigger. Every detail seemed to sit just outside my comprehension, a reality slightly askew from the one I knew. And the voices, those strange garbled voices on the radio. It hit me then, as I glanced at the dial. The station I had tuned into, somewhere between 87.7 and 87.9, shouldn't exist. I knew damn well no station occupied that space. But the voices, the static, they'd been there the whole time. I flicked the radio off, The silence that followed felt suffocating, as though the absence of noise had sucked the air out of the car. My mind raced. How long had I been driving? How long had I been listening to that signal, pulling me into this strange, distorted version of reality? The thought made my skin crawl. Suddenly, something caught my eye ahead. A flash of movement in the distance, a silhouette darting across the road. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed on the brakes, but the road was empty again, the headlights sweeping across nothing but asphalt. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared down the road, waiting, dreading that it would show itself again. The radio flicked back on. My heart dropped. The dial, the one I had turned off just moments ago, was glowing faintly. The static crackled, and those same garbled voices came back, faint at first, but then rising in pitch and volume. It was as if the radio had a mind of its own, bringing me back to the place I desperately wanted to escape. No. No way, I muttered, reaching out to turn it off again. But the dial wouldn't budge. I twisted it, pulled at it, even hit it, but the voices just got louder. I could hear them clearer now, not words, but a tone, almost like chanting, drawing me deeper into this nightmare. My grip tightened on the wheel as I glanced back at the road, anxiety crawling up my spine. And then there it was. Standing on the road again, illuminated by the headlights, was the creature. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas, trying to floor it, but the car didn't move. Panic surged through me as I yanked the gear shift, grinding it into drive, but the tires spun uselessly. I was stuck. The creature took a step forward. My headlights cut through the darkness, exposing even more horrifying detail. The veins, bulging and writhing beneath its grotesque gray skin, glistened in the light like something alive, pulsing with either rage or desperation. Its yellow eyes, those soulless orbs, glowed brighter now, burning with an insatiable hunger and a malevolent intelligence that sent an icy shiver down my spine. And then, its mouth, no, that vertical slit across its torso, slowly peeled open again, revealing that same yawning black void. It wasn't just emptiness. It was oblivion itself, swallowing the light, swallowing everything, pulling me toward the edge of nothingness. I glanced down at the radio again. The voices, the static. It was like a switch had flipped in my brain. Somehow the radio, the signal, was tied to this creature. The frequency had pulled me into this reality, this twisted version of the world where this thing existed. I had tuned into the wrong frequency, into something that wasn't supposed to be heard, into a place I wasn't supposed to be. The creature took another step, and my heart raced. I reached out, frantically twisting the dial on the radio, but the static only grew louder. The creature was now just feet away from the car, its long bony hand reaching out toward the hood. I could feel the air grow colder, could see my breath misting in front of me as I struggled to get the car moving, but nothing worked. I was trapped. I panicked. I grabbed the radio, ripping it from the dash in a fit of desperation. Sparks flew as wires snapped loose, and for a moment, everything went silent. The static was gone, the voices gone, and the creature, it was gone. I sat there, breathing hard, staring at the empty road in front of me. The cold grip of terror slowly loosened its hold on my chest, and my fingers went limp on the steering wheel. The headlights swept the road, showing nothing but asphalt and empty fields. I had done it. Somehow, disconnecting the radio had broken whatever link had been pulling me into that other reality. But the feeling of dread didn't leave. Even as I sat in the dark, the cold sweat dripping down my back, I couldn't shake the sensation that something had been watching me, that something was still watching me. The air felt heavy, oppressive. I reached for the old sipper, my hand trembling as I uncapped it and took a swig, the burn of the liquor doing little to calm my nerves. I had to get out of here. I had to keep moving. With the radio dead, the Buick finally responded, and I pressed down on the gas. The car lurched forward, and I sped down the road, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from whatever had just happened. The road blurred beneath me, the tires humming against the pavement as I drove faster and faster, trying to outrun the fear that clung to me like a shadow. But the landscape around me felt off. The fields seemed too wide, the trees too tall, the sky too dark. It was as if I was still caught in the edges of that other place, like the boundary between realities was thin here. My mind raced. The radio, it had been the gateway. That much I was sure of. Somehow that frequency between 87.7 and 87.9 had pulled me into the creature's world, and now, even with the radio gone, I wasn't entirely sure I had left it. Time felt wrong. Distance felt wrong. I had no idea how long I had been driving when I finally saw it. Lights in the distance. A motel. It's about damn time, I muttered to myself. I didn't stop driving until I was in the parking lot. The place stood in the middle of nowhere, just like everything else that night. There were no other cars, not a single sign of life. But it didn't matter. It was shelter. It was the first sign of civilization I had seen in what felt like days, and I needed to rest. The adrenaline still pumped through my veins as I pulled into the handicap spot, the closest one to the door. No one would need it at this hour, I figured. As I stepped out of the car, my legs felt wobbly beneath me, like I had been running for miles. I took a deep breath and headed inside. The place was as decrepit as they come. The front desk was empty, so I slammed the bell twice, as hard as any man could. A disgruntled employee, probably in his late 40s, walked out from the room behind the front desk. I must have woken him from his nap. "Hey, man," he said unenthusiastically, his voice flat as he fumbled with his shirt. I couldn't help but notice the buttons were all in the wrong holes, the fabric misaligned and rumpled, hanging awkwardly on him. He didn't seem to care, though, as if the effort of fixing it wasn't worth his time or energy. I told him I needed a room for a couple of hours. He grabbed a logbook from under the desk and started flipping through it like they had a lot of people checked in. I think he dozed off halfway, then woke up and kept going, his finger trailing across the page. 7 or 9, he asked. What? I was too tired to make sense of the question, so he repeated, "Room 7 or room 9? I wittingly asked, "What happened to 8? He shrugged. "There's no 8. "Really?" I said. "Just pick one for me." He turned to grab one of the keys hanging in the little box on the wall, then turned back toward me. "It'll be 87ers, he said. "That's an expensive couple of hours for an old raggedy motel," I muttered to myself as I pulled out 9 tens from my wallet and handed them over. "Keep the change," I told him. "I can't. It's against policy," he said, handing me back $3 along with the key to room 7. I looked up at the clock on the wall, just above his head. It still read midnight. I'd been driving for hours, seen all kinds of strange things, and yet, according to that clock, no time had passed. It felt wrong, but I was too tired to care. All I wanted was a bed to collapse into. I asked him for a wake-up call at 6 in the morning. "On the dot," I said. I opened the door to room 7 and was greeted by the smell of mildew. The place was as run down as I expected. An old, worn-out bed, a chair with stuffing poking through the upholstery, and a bathroom I wouldn't dare step into without shoes on. But it didn't matter. At that point, I'd have slept on the floor if I had to. I kicked off my shoes, collapsed onto the lumpy old sofa, and propped my feet up on the bed. The exhaustion hit me like a freight train. My head barely hit the cushion before I was out like a light. It didn't take long before something jolted me awake. The phone on the nightstand was ringing, loud and shrill. I sat up, groggy and disoriented, and grabbed it halfway through its second ring. "Yeah?" I mumbled into the receiver. "Sir, it's 6 o'clock," said the same gruff voice from the front desk. "Your wake-up call." I thanked him, hung up the phone, and wiped the sleep from my eyes. I felt like I'd barely slept, but I was drenched in sweat, like I'd been running a marathon in my sleep. Was it a nightmare? I couldn't remember. My mind was foggy, and I felt uneasy, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I got up, walked over to the sink, and splashed some cold water on my face. The motel mirror was cracked, and in the dim light, my reflection looked more tired than ever. I reached for the old sipper, took a long swig, and let the burn settle in my chest. That helped. I capped it, grabbed my things, and made my way to the door. The moment I stepped outside, I felt it again. That strange feeling. Something was off. The motel, which had been deserted when I arrived, was now bustling with activity. People were walking around, chatting, coming and going as if the place had always been full. It was disorienting. I stood there for a moment, watching the people pass by. Where had they come from? When I got to the front desk, the man from the night before was there, but something about him had changed. He looked more put together, like he'd had a full night's rest. His clothes were neatly pressed, his demeanor more polite. It was as if he was a completely different person. "Busy morning?" I joked, trying to make light of the strangeness. He gave me a polite smile, but didn't seem to understand the joke. "You're all checked out, sir. Have a good day," he said, sliding my receipt across the counter. I nodded, thanked him, and walked back to my Buick. As soon as I stepped outside, I noticed a bright yellow parking ticket flapping under my windshield wiper. A citation for parking in the handicap spot without a tag. $60. I let out a long sigh, but honestly, I wasn't even mad. If anything, I was somehow relieved. It felt like I was finally back in the real world, a world where life is unfair, rules are annoying, and people are generally a pain in the ass. By the time I rolled into Ohio, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep shade of purple. I'd been driving for what felt like forever, but I was finally here, Cleveland, to be exact. A business trip for the cheating husband, or at least that's what his wife had been told. I parked the Buick a few blocks away from the hotel, in a spot where I could keep an eye on the entrance without drawing attention to myself. The place was one of those upscale joints, the kind you take a woman to if you're trying to impress her. Or, in this case, hide her. I pulled out the camera, checked the lens, and settled in for the wait. I've done enough surveillance jobs to know that patience is key. Most of the time, people slip up when they think no one's watching, when they feel comfortable. And sure enough, a couple of hours later, the husband walked out of the hotel. He wasn't alone. The woman on his arm was younger, maybe in her early 30s. Long blonde hair, a little too much makeup, the kind of woman who makes you forget you've got a wife at home. I watched as they laughed together, oblivious to everything around them. They had that easy, casual intimacy of people who've done this a dozen times before. I snapped the photos. Quick, precise, clean. I wasn't looking for art here, just proof. And the lens didn't lie. Click, click, click. A few more shots as they got into a cab together, probably heading to some fancy restaurant where they could play pretend for the night. It was all so predictable, so ordinary. Just another guy who thought he could have it all and get away with it. I watched them disappear into the city, then leaned back in the driver's seat. Case closed. The job wasn't hard, but it left a sour taste in my mouth, like they all do. People think private investigators live for this stuff, exposing dirty secrets and digging up the truth. But after a while, it just feels like you're in the business of tearing people's lives apart. Maybe that's why I stopped taking so many of these cases. They leave you feeling hollow, like you're part of the problem. I glanced at the camera, the photos safely stored on the roll of film, and started the car. It was time to head back to Louisiana. Time to leave this mess behind and get back to my so-called life. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, something gnawed at me. Something that had been gnawing at me ever since that night on the road. The highway stretched out in front of me, dark and endless, just like it had on the way up. The monotony of the road was familiar, but this time, the drive felt different, heavier somehow. The radio was off, not just off, but completely gone, pulled out of the slot and lying in the passenger seat. I hadn't touched it since that strange night with the garbled voices, when it had felt like it was picking up signals from somewhere it shouldn't have been. After that, I couldn't stand the sight of it. Yanking it out had been my only option. Now, the only sound was the hum of the Buick's engine, a constant low vibration that filled the silence, like the road itself was trying to remind me of what had happened. I could have flown back. Probably should have. But flying never sat right with me. Never has. Probably never will. Besides, the drive gave me time to think. Time I wasn't sure I wanted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still running, still driving away from something I couldn't outrun. It wasn't just the case. The cheating husband, the photos, they didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. That part of the job was simple, clear-cut. What was bothering me was deeper, more personal. The kind of thing you don't talk about, not even with yourself. I hadn't told anyone about the night on the road, the creature, or the way time had seemed to stop. What was the point? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was. Maybe I'd just been pushing myself too hard, driving too long without a break. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I'd seen something real, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I thought back to the way those yellow eyes had followed me, the way the thing had just stood there, watching, as if it knew me better than I knew myself. And that mouth, or void, whatever it was, the emptiness of it. It had stuck with me, that feeling of being swallowed whole by something I couldn't escape. I'd been trying to run from it ever since, but the road only seemed to lead me back to the same thoughts, the same questions. I glanced at the dashboard clock. Midnight. Again. I frowned and tapped it with my finger, but it didn't budge. Just like before, time was stuck, frozen. A cold knot twisted in my gut. It couldn't be happening again. Not here, not now. But there it was. Midnight. No matter how far I'd driven, no matter how many hours had passed, the clock refused to move. I rubbed my temples, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the clock was broken. But I didn't believe that. Not really. I took a deep breath and focused on the road ahead, but my thoughts kept drifting back to my life. The choices I'd made, the things I'd lost, the people I'd pushed away. After I was pushed out of the police force, I'd thought the PI gig would fill the void, give me some sense of purpose again. But it hadn't. Not really. I was just going through the motions, drifting from one case to the next, never staying in one place long enough to deal with the mess I'd left behind. And then there was the drinking. It had started as a way to take the edge off, to numb the pain in my leg and the ache in my head. But it had become more than that. It had become a way to forget. to avoid facing the fact that I was getting older, that my best days were behind me, that I didn't know who I was without the badge. The truth was, I hadn't been right since that night. I'd been off. Like I was walking through life in someone else's shoes. I drove for hours, but the farther I went, the more I felt like I was circling back to the same place, the same questions, the same doubts. I started wondering if I'd ever really left that stretch of road in Kentucky, or if I was still stuck there, trapped in that moment, with the creature's eyes watching me from the shadows. By the time I crossed into Louisiana, the sky had started to lighten, a faint glow on the horizon. But even with the dawn breaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still driving through the night, still running from something I couldn't see. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun peeked over the rooftops. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, staring at the house in front of me. The photos were in the glove box, ready to be delivered. The case was done, but nothing felt finished. Not really. I stepped out of the car, wincing as the old pain in my leg flared up. As I headed toward the front door, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see those yellow eyes glowing in the shadows behind me. But there was nothing, just the quiet of the morning. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left it behind, that I'd never left it behind. And maybe, just maybe, I never would. I handed the wife the envelope, thick with photographs. The evidence she needed to confirm what she'd suspected all along. Her husband was cheating. It wasn't the first time I'd closed a case like this, and it wouldn't be the last. She looked at the photos, her face hardening, tears welling in her eyes. But she didn't cry. Not in front of me. They never did. She thanked me, tucked the envelope into her purse, and left without another word. I watched her go, her heels clicking across the floor of my office, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for her. But in the end, it wasn't my job to fix her marriage. I was just there to get the truth. The truth always has a way of hurting. The office fell quiet again after she left, just the ticking of the old clock on the wall to keep me company. I leaned back in my chair, lighting a cigarette and staring out the window at the fading light of the evening. The case was over, and by all accounts, I should have felt the usual satisfaction that came with closing a job, but I didn't. Not this time. Lately, nothing felt finished. The work, the long drives, the hours of waiting in my car, the shadowed faces of strangers passing by, none of it had the same meaning it used to. It was like I'd been sleepwalking through life, just going through the motions, waiting for something to shake me awake. But after that night on the road, after seeing that thing, I wasn't sure I'd ever wake up again. I snubbed out the cigarette and stood up, stretching my legs, feeling the old ache in my left thigh flare up again. The doctors had said it would heal in time, but the truth was, the bullet wound was the least of my injuries. Whatever happened that night had left a scar that ran deeper than flesh. The kind of scar you can't see in the mirror, but you feel every time you close your eyes. The clock ticked louder in the silence, and I glanced at it, my brow furrowing. Midnight. Same as the night I'd seen it. The night everything changed. The night I couldn't shake, no matter how far I drove or how many cases I took. I couldn't tell if time had really stopped for me that night, or if I'd just been stuck ever since, circling the same dark roads, haunted by the same shadows. Even now, sitting here in my office, with the case wrapped up and nothing left to do, I still felt like I was running from something. Like no matter how many miles I put between myself and that stretch of highway, it would catch up with me. I opened the drawer to my desk and pulled out the old watch, the one that had stopped working that night. I hadn't worn it since, but I kept it with me. Some part of me had hoped it would start ticking again, that it might be a sign that everything was back to normal. But it hadn't. The second hand was still frozen, as if time itself had come to a halt and refused to move forward. I set the watch back in the drawer and closed it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe that night was just a bad dream, the result of too many hours on the road and too few hours of sleep. Maybe I'd been chasing ghosts that weren't there. But the thing about ghosts is they don't go away just because you stop believing in them. They linger. They follow you. And if you're not careful, they can pull you under. I stepped outside my office, the cool night air washing over me. The street was quiet, the city winding down for the evening. And for a moment, I just stood there, watching the cars pass by, headlights flickering in the distance. I pulled out another cigarette, flicked the lighter, and watched the flame dance for a second before taking a long drag. I was supposed to be back to normal. I was supposed to be over it. But the truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever be the same. You don't come face to face with something like that and just walk away untouched. Even now, standing here, miles away from that road, I still felt like I hadn't really left. Like I was still out there, somewhere, trapped in the dark, with those yellow eyes watching me from the shadows. I exhaled the smoke slowly, watching it curl up into the night sky, and glanced at the street. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer, and for a split second, I swore I saw them glow that same eerie yellow. I blinked, and they were gone. Just another car driving past, but my heart was still racing, my palms still slick with sweat. Maybe I'd been wrong all along. Maybe that thing hadn't let me go. Maybe it was still out there, lurking, waiting. Or maybe the real problem was that I hadn't let it go. I took one last drag and dropped the cigarette to the pavement, grinding it under my heel. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The clock on the wall back in my office would keep ticking, even if I didn't check. Time would keep moving, just like it always had. But me? I wasn't so sure. I turned away from the street and headed back inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow, there'd be another case, another job to distract me from the questions I didn't want to answer. But tonight, it was just me, the ticking of the clock, and the shadows that wouldn't let me rest.